Well, it's thinned out a bit. It's that time of the day, and we're wrapping up the Innovation Theater. Thank you for staying. Hope this caps a lot of information transfer. That's the whole premise of this theater. We're very lucky and happy to pass it over to Greg Walker here. He's the research director of CABA. CABA?
CABA, yeah.
CABA, okay.
CABA or CABA is the same thing.
But they had some fascinating new research to come, so prick up your ears, and I'll just leave it to you.
All right, next slide. So I'm Greg Walker. I'm the research director at CABA. It stands for the Continental Automated Buildings Association. I'm going to give a brief overview of a research project that we recently completed on organizational productivity with building automation systems and looking at really building technologies in office buildings and how they impact the productivity of a workforce. I'll go over a brief about CABA if you're not aware. CABA is, our vision is to advance the connected building and connected home sectors, and or enable organizations and individuals to make informed decisions about the integration of technologies, ecosystems, connected lifestyles, homes, and buildings. So we have a Connected Home Council, which represents around 200 or so individuals from probably 170 different companies on the Connected Home side. And then we have an Intelligent Buildings Council that does the same thing on the large building side. We have a news brief that goes out to around 17,000 subscribers every Thursday with information and any of the hot topic issues going on in the intelligent buildings, connected home space. And we do networking events, presentations, and we have a largest library of research in the world in intelligent buildings, connected homes. We have about 800 just members-only research reports out to our members. And then we do the white papers, which are more 10 to 20 page white paper research for projects. And then we do sort of larger scale pay-to-play research projects, this is an example of, where we chip in the funds from several different organizations. Each one of these organizations, that you'll see later, is chipped in $15,000 to make the research possible, and it's a $150,000 research report. If you're interested, I can share it out with anybody that's here. Just come up, give your business card, and I can send you an email with a link where you can download the project. So here, this is our board of directors. So we added a couple more here actually, but we have 25 companies in the space. And it's pretty broad, all from anything related to connected homes, intelligent buildings. Sometimes it's OEMs, so we have lots of OEMs. Sometimes it's software companies like Intel and Microsoft. Other times it's utility companies like Hydro-Quebec or Southern California Edison. And it's pretty the broad range of companies. So these are the companies that are on our board that guide and direct what we do on an everyday basis. And they've been doing so for quite a number of years. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year and in the space. And then I'll get on to start talking about the research projects. So we're an association. We don't do research ourselves, but we commission and facilitate research from some of our research organizations. And this particular project was done by the National Research Council of Canada. It's not a Canadian project. It's just they're the ones that happen to win the particular bid. They have around 400 PhD researchers, and they really do all the building codes in Canada, and have a lot of expertise and a lot of PhD researchers working on organizational productivity in the build environment for intelligent buildings. And they've been on a board of directors for a few years, but then again, it's not a Canadian-based association, research project. I mean, these are the funders of the research. So each one of these companies chipped in money to make the research possible, and they're also on the steering committee to help shape the project to say like what are some of the deliverables and things like that in the project itself. So a little bit of background about how it came to be. So there was a lot of interest from some of our CABA membership in the renewed interest in organizational productivity and really utilizing the building technologies to to focus on the ROI of a building and not just the energy component, which was traditionally used. And then there has been a lot more interest from the real estate environment with green technologies, sustainability and green buildings, healthy buildings, sick building syndrome, those type of initiatives. So we started back in 2014 and we did a white paper. It was around a 25, 30-page white paper on the same topic, and essentially we set the framework to see, like, do building technologies have an impact on the productivity of a workforce? And the results of that one was we basically spun it out into this larger scale research project. So this is the phase one. So this is if you come see me at the end, I can send you this entire research report. But it looks at basically conversions of engineering, psychology, health and well-being, and building technologies, IT. And it looks at some of the KPIs that were measured, were absenteeism, employee intent to turnover, self-assessed performance, job satisfaction, and health and well-being symptoms in the project. So this was really, it goes forward on, if you're aware of, JLL has a 330-300 rule where 3% of cost of a building is the utilities, and the energy, it comes in that 3%, the $3 per square foot, sorry. And then $30 would be per square foot would be your rent, and then $300 would be the cost of the employees in the building. So it really, this project looks at that 300, the major cost, and the idea being is just a small 1% savings in that sort of 90% 300 per square foot cost would usurp a 200% increase in the 3%. And it looks at the better buildings approach and multiple metrics that were used. And I'll go to the next slide here. This is another example of it. Here is some people use the 82% rule, and then 10% equipment, and then the building is 5, and the maintenance and operation is 3. Here's another example of what is commonly used, is that forgotten 90%. So essentially the 90% of the building is the cost and the employees themselves. So so the traditional way people would fund research projects is always on the energy. We're trying to do a non-traditional look at productivity. We're using a multiple metric approach. We're looking at the national database of statistics and the research literature to really figure out what these metrics would be, and to really have a balanced scorecard approach. So each one of these research projects and research reports that we looked at various degrees of the way they quantify that particular metric. So we need to sort of level the playing field and have a balanced approach. And so we benchmark a lot of these research initiatives. So here's some of the example of some of the benchmarking that was done in the past. People used to do like the number of cars on the road or the number of trees planted as how they benchmark sustainability and green initiatives. So this one does, because it's multiple metrics, we tried to benchmark each one in the chart that I'll show later. So here's some of the metrics. So absenteeism, intent to turnover, self-assessed performance, job satisfaction, health and well-being symptoms. We tried to look at complaints from facility managers, but there was really no literature on the complaints from facility managers, so we had to leave that off the research findings. And then we tried to do a benchmark for each one of those. Some of the corporate strategies that we're comparing. So we're focused on the better buildings in green here, but some of the other corporate strategies that companies use for productivity is open versus closed offices, so office type. Workplace health programs. This could be nutritional programs, fitness memberships, things like that, nutritional advice. Then bonuses, these financial bonuses. And then flexible work hours. So you can work from home, or you can set your own schedule, and as long as you get your work done. This is really a secondary literature type review project that we completed. So it looks at 4,000 abstracts from the literature and the scientific literature, and 500 full reports and full articles that were sort of mulled over to make the research possible. And then the studies we're looking at were always real-world research, real-world environments, and not laboratory, because there's two different ways that you find that people do productivity studies. A lot of times Harvard does a lot with ventilation, things like that, and always in the laboratory environment. And then there's the real-world sort of actual use cases and real-world environments. Obviously, there's pros and cons to each. It's a little bit harder to extrapolate it's a cause and effect of the real-world environments, but it's probably more meaningful in terms of what's actually happening in your office, workplace. So essentially, this chart here is the findings of the full research project, and I can go over some of these line by line here, but so at the top you see some of the strategies that we talked about, and this project looked at the better buildings in red, that box there in red, some of the KPIs with absenteeism, employee turnover, and whatnot at the side. And then here's the benchmarking that I talked about to try to get them on because there's looking at around 4,000 review articles and around 500 articles, they're all done differently, so we had to benchmark them to some degree. So for absenteeism, this is literally the number of days per employee per year, and the standard is between 2 and 15 is the typical company. And you'll see that when you implement better buildings technologies, this could be building automation systems, this could be increased ventilation systems, this could be or whole building approaches like green buildings, LEED buildings, things like that. It went down by 0.4 to 1.5 days per year. And then you see some of the other ones had positive. So it's a down. In this particular case, it's positive. The one where it says up and down at the very end, the flexible work hours, that means it's inconsistent in the research. And where you see one there's nothing there, that just means we didn't find any data, and then no reports, and 0 has no impact. And employee turnover. So this is actually, we benchmarked it from 18 to 30. It's 0 is I intend to look for another job in the next year, and 100 is that. 100 is I 100% intend to find another job in the next year, and 0 is I'm staying with the job that I have. I'm definitely not looking to look for another job. So it's not actual churn, or so if you had a score of 20, it's not 20% of your workforce is turned over. It's really actually that's actually a lower score, and then they don't intend to look for other jobs. And you'll see there's a small decrease with better building technologies. Huge decrease here with open versus closed offices. And ironically, contrary to where the industry is going with the real estate, this is actually closed offices. So you have a huge impact on the retention of employees if you have an actual office, as opposed to the open concept workplaces, which a lot of the Cadillac Fairviews and CBREs and other builders, developers are sort of going to that direction. And then there's a self-assessed performance. This is always a percent scale, and 0 meaning there's a 0 increase in your performance. And then it ranged from usually -20 to +20%. And then you see there's a positive impact there, a positive impact in a couple of the other metrics, and there's no for the flexible work hours. And job satisfaction is very similar to 100%, sort of benchmark it from 0 to 100. Similar scale as employee turnover, but really asking them how satisfied they are. So people are generally satisfied with their jobs, 60 to 80, they're generally satisfied, but there's an increase there from 4 to 9 points with if you're in a smarter building. And then workplace, health and well-being symptoms, and then health and well-being overall. Same sort of 0 to 100 scale. So we actually, and this is, the symptoms is obviously, you want a negative is more encouraged, it's a positive number. And then the health and well-being symptoms overall is really how satisfied with your health overall. And so a positive, a bigger number is better in that last metric. So there's a positive increase on those two. So essentially, this whole graph looks at, is essentially showing that building technologies and implementing building technologies in your workplace has a positive impact on the productivity of your workforce. That's the same or greater than those traditional metrics that people use, that companies use, like health programs, bonuses, flexible work hours, open versus closed offices. So here are some of the gaps that we found in the research, really looking at some of the looking at some more high-profile concepts, more complicated concepts to investigate, maybe creativity, new employee retention, communication, and presenteeism. There's been a gap in the facility management complaints. There was no data on that particular component, so it's harder to get that, and they don't want to share that information. More longitudinal studies, so really instead of just one-off, like sort of before and after, we're looking at more for long-term, maybe 10 years or so. In situ job performance, so instead of just saying how satisfied you are with your job, really look at the action, like in terms of your performance, how well you are performing, actually looking at the outcome of that. So it gets a little bit more complicated, especially considering everyone has different job tasks and job roles. And then leveraging other sort of IoT technologies like wearables and other sort of metrics. And then the last one is really if the scientific literature had a more consistent way of reporting and scaling these, and that we could compare the two different studies side by side, like different companies report different ways. So what we did is we did a task force to do a second phase of the research project, and these are the companies and the individuals on the task force. And the goal of this project is the first one. This first phase was just completed, and that basically said there is an impact, and it's the same as those traditional metrics is. The second phase will look at an actual group of buildings from a donor who provides the data, and to look at what technologies have what impact. So we're getting funders on board right now. We have 13 companies that have signed up, and we're looking for a contributor that can provide the building data, but also the corresponding HR data from the surveys that they do with their employees, like that on a biannual or quarterly basis to get those absenteeism numbers and things like that, and really can say what sort of technology should a company implement that would have the highest ROI, sort of the lowest hanging fruit for people to implement. So is it smart lighting? Is it automated shading? Is it building automation systems? Whatever it is, whatever sort of technology. So basically, we're just looking at this, the building automation system. Instead of looking at the traditional energy component, we go and we get the performance, retention, absenteeism, and complaints from the HR and then the facilities, and compare that with the building technology data that we have. Here's an example of this next phase that we're looking into right now. So the blue lines would represent buildings, and the dots 1, 2, and 3 would be retrofits. So when you're implementing a technology, you take a whole workforce, you put them into like a LEED Platinum building, from a dumb building to a smart building. What sort of technologies have changed? And then we at the bottom you see those HR surveys that are done on a routine basis at all the major organizations, multinationals, and then basically you're comparing the retrofits, and you compare the HR data before and after, and then maybe even over time, and that's what we're looking to do right now, and we're working on that with the same organization, the National Research Council. And then here are some of they get the report. There's going to be a submission into this one. The first phase was submitted to a scientific journal. The second one's going to be the same. And the cost to get involved is we lowered it down a little bit to around $5,000 to $15,000 for companies that want to get involved. and get the research findings. And yeah, that's the extent of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions, or if you're interested in getting the first phase of the research, come up to me, give me a business card. I'll write a little note to make sure I can email it out to you, and then I can answer any questions of this first phase or the second phase. Yeah. Yeah. No? Okay. Thanks a lot.
Greg. I would love to get that report. I'll give you a card in a second. Well, thank you for hanging in there, gentlemen. This concludes the Innovation Theater. It's been 3 days of panels, presentations, well-moderated discussions. We hope you enjoyed it and hope these nuggets of information will help you in your careers and in the decisions you make at your companies. So see you next year, I hope in Denver. Have a safe trip back.